Thank you, everybody, for joining. My name is Malcolm Lewis. I am the Chief Marketing Officer for Certemy. We're here today to chat with Janice about certification program accreditation. We're going to spend about 20 to 25 minutes chatting with Janice, and then we're going to open things up for your questions. Everybody will get a copy of the recording for this particular chat. And so before we jump into the questions, Janice, I wonder if you could just give us a quick introduction. Tell us about yourself, share some of your experience around credentialing and accreditation.
Sure. So Janice Moore, I work with Seacrest. I co-founded Seacrest as a consulting company in 2008, primarily to do what we're going to be talking about today, and that's to help organizations who were interested in seeking accreditation to navigate through the process of figuring out where they're at and preparing for that and working through it. We've done some other things over the years, and we continue to do those in terms of helping with governance, restructuring, policy and procedure development, strategic planning, and those kind of things. But it's always been focused around kind of that core piece of accreditation. And we've worked over the years with a lot of different programs, from your traditional nonprofit certification boards to for-profit companies and the various accreditation bodies to just kind of work through that process.
All right, fantastic. Well, let's get things going right away. So first question, what is exactly third-party accreditation for certification programs?
Good question. So, for our purposes, it's really just a third party objectively coming in and saying, do you meet the set of standards that we have developed? And so in the United States, we have choices for accreditation. If you're a certification program or personnel certification program, then there's the NCCA standards, which have been around since the 1970s, that are through ICE, or the Institute of Credentialing Excellence. And then there's an international standard, ISO 17024, that's available through ANSI or ICE. And then if you're a certificate or an assessment-based certificate program, then you're looking at an ISO 1100 or an ANSI ASTM standards. That's as many acronyms as I can get into a paragraph, I guess.
You know, when I first joined this credentialing world, I realized that I was entering a world of acronyms. But so that raises an interesting question. What exactly is the difference between certification and a certificate program?
Yeah, there's some really key differences, and it's important to know going in what you have, what you want to have, and that's going to affect what set of standards you're working towards, and change everything about the process. So certificate programs or assessment-based certificate programs are focused on education. That's how I think of them. It's a difference between, are you trying to teach, or are you trying to assess what somebody already knows where they learned it somewhere else? So yeah. For a certificate program, you're really focused on training and a set of learning objectives, and then figuring out whether somebody met the learning objectives that you taught to them. So, a couple of years ago, I took a leadership course. It was about 6 months in length, and all along the way, we had these performance-based assessments and some at the end. And then when we finished the course and we demonstrated we'd learned what we were taught, then we got a certificate of completion. So that's a fairly typical certificate course. What we're talking about today in terms of accreditation is your personnel certification program or professional certification program. And that is much more focused on the exam, because you're trying to determine, does someone know what we need them to know? Do they have the knowledge, skills, abilities to go out there and perform in a role or on the job safely enough or adequately enough that we feel good? So the examples people are always familiar with, things like ASAE's Certified Association Executive, or certified public accountants, or financial planners. You might need experience, you might need to study, you might need education to get those certifications, but they're not dictating to you, come to our course to do that. You go, you get prepared, and then you come to them to pass the exam.
Got it. And so there are accreditations for both types of programs?
There are. They're different. They're different standards, but there is an accreditation process for both types. So if you want to get accredited, you have choices depending on what kind of program you already have. So for certification that we're talking about more today, it's NCCA standards or the ISO 17024 standards. And then if you happen to be a nursing certification program, there's a set of accreditation standards specifically for them as well.
And actually, just a little side note, both Janice and I will both be at the ABNS conference in Atlanta. I think back end of next week, right, Janice?
I think it is next week. That's right. Yeah.
That's right. So if you'd like to meet either one of us or both of us, we'd love to see you there.
That would be great.
So our topic today is the whys and the hows. So let's start with the whys. Specifically, what value does accreditation hold for a certification program?
So we see people look at value in different ways and seek accreditation for different reasons. So I think sometimes the value, I mean, to me, there's some inherent value in it that I'll talk about, but also some things that can be specific to where you're at. So for a lot of programs, value can be in terms of marketing. That they can say, hey, we have some competitors, but we're the only one that's accredited. Mm-hmm. Or sometimes it's catch up, right? The competitor may be accredited and they want to get that accreditation too, or they want to get a second accreditation to compete in that field. So it can have that kind of value in terms of you're going to have to do the education with your constituents to make sure they understand what accreditation is, depending on what field you're in, but it can have some real value there. Sometimes we see a value in terms of there's legislation or regulation or some other standards that require or really push people to become accredited. So it can have meaning in that way too. Probably most often what we see is just the credibility that it brings. Mm-hmm. So it's one thing to say, hey, our program's great. But it's another to say that this third party who had, no bias and is objective came in and said, we meet these standards and these standards were developed by the industry. We didn't just handpick the ones we could meet or anything like that. So I see that a lot, especially for newer programs that are kind of trying to go out there and make their mark, that this can bring them some credibility beyond just what they can, market about themselves or say about themselves. One of the biggest pieces, though, that I see beyond all those things is just what it can bring in terms of the quality improvement and what it does for your internal processes. Because just the time you will spend preparing for accreditation, getting your policies and procedures in order, looking at, do we have a quality improvement process or how are we going to implement them, looking at everything you've done to develop and maintain your exam, pulling together all that documentation, all that preparation just is kind of a quality improvement effort in and of itself, and it really brings a lot to the program. So just that process can we've over the years worked with so many programs that have said, I went into this because we had to get accredited for whatever reason, but I never knew it was going to bring so much value just in terms of all of the efficiencies that we would make, all of the improvements we would make, things like that.
Yeah, I think it just really helps people hold themselves in their program to a high standard and get that third party stamp of approval. So I was pretty amazed to learn that you've done over 260 applications for accreditation. So based on that pretty amazing body of experience, what recommendations do you have? So we've talked a little bit about the why, now we're into the how. What recommendations do you have for successfully navigating the accreditation process?
If I was going to give you a short answer for that, I would just say start so much earlier than you think you need to. But I'll give you a long answer too. So we have looked at this kind of over all of these applications we've done, 260 something. No matter what field they're in or kind of where the program's at when it comes to us, what I've found to be really effective is just looking at it in terms of 3 phases. And the end phase is applying for accreditation. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people think that's the start, but accreditation really isn't a consultative process. It's just like when somebody comes to take a certification exam, you're not going to say, well, these are the questions you missed, and here's how you should go study and fix it, and let me teach it to you. It's really an assessment process, and accreditation in some ways is too. And so you want to be ready before you apply. Mm-hmm. So we look at it in kind of 3 big steps. And the first one is to do, we call it a gap analysis, but a needs assessment, some process, and you can do this, you don't need a consultant to do it. You can do it on your own take the set of standards you're interested in and just look piece by piece by piece, where are we at? And it's easy to just kind of read through the standards, but do the work of like really looking at not just, do I know I do this, but can I prove it? Do I have the documentation? Do I have the reporting? Do I have everything I need to demonstrate to somebody who doesn't know the ins and outs of my program like I do, that this has been done in compliance with the standards? So that's always what we recommend as a starting point, is figure out exactly where you are. The big pieces like, governance and separating from education and exam development, and all the little pieces too. Do we have this confidentiality policy or these forms? And then, that moves you into our second step, which is just take the time you need to fix those things. Whatever those things are that you identified in the first step, take all the time you need to address them, whether it's documentation or reworking your governance or doing some exam development that needed to be done. Whatever it is, take the time to do it, so that when you get to that third phase of actually sitting down, filling out the accreditation application and submitting it, you're ready, and you've met the standards, and you're ready to show that you meet the standards. And that, over the years has just shown to be the most efficient process, because otherwise you're filling out that application and I didn't realize we haven't done this. We have to go back and do that. And then you start going back to the application again, and you go back, and it just ends up taking a lot of time. And that's another piece of it too, is just kind of working with everybody on your team, whether that's your staff team, your leadership, your stakeholders, to just manage the expectations around the process. Because this is not let's sit down next week and apply for accreditation and we'll have it by the week after kind of process, right? It's months, sometimes it's years. So helping people understand, whether it's the board president that said, hey, go get this done, or somebody on the staff that's going to be involved in helping you implement it, just like really understanding all the steps involved and what it's going to take and how long it's going to take, so that they can be, supportive in that, and not, going like, hey, why is this taking so long, and getting frustrated with it.
And across those, quick side question, across those 260 applications, what's the average amount of time it takes? What's the fastest you've ever done it, and what's the longest it's ever taken? Just to give people a feel for.
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's kind of two aspects of it, is like, how long does it take to get ready to apply, and then how long does it take to get through the application process itself? So the application process itself, I would say give yourself a couple months to fill out the application, because it's tremendously helpful. There's the time it takes to write out the application or type it out, gather your documents. You want some time for that, but also just like take the time to get a fresh set of eyes on it, have somebody else, whether it's, a coworker or whatever, look at it, because we all know the ins and outs of our own programs, and we know what we think and how we can explain that, but it's not always as clear to somebody who doesn't know our programs. So to get that, take that little bit of time. So give yourself a couple months to get an application ready. And then I would say, it's several months for whatever accrediting body you have to review it. If it's 17024, you're going to have a desk review, and then a site visit, and some back and forth on nonconformities, and then an eventual decision. With NCCA, the process doesn't include the site visit, but it includes a couple layers of desk reviews. So either way, it's several months. But then the bigger time period, right, is the time you spent preparing to get there. And so I would say the fastest we've ever done it, from a program that was just being created to the day they applied for accreditation, was 12 months. And that was, an organization that was going to put a lot of resources into getting that done and putting a lot of manpower behind it. More typically, I would say, for somebody who's pretty close and just needs to polish up a few policies and gather some documentation, maybe 6 months of preparation, but often as much as a year and a half.
Okay. So, so we've talked about what needs to get done. Let's talk a little bit about who should get it done. So is this a staff function, or should volunteer leaders be involved, or who really gets the work done here in your experience?
Sure, that's a good question. A little bit of both. Primarily, I see this as the work of getting this done as a staff function, in terms of filling out the application, uploading things to the accrediting body, kind of managing the process, creating a project plan. Certification board leaders are going to be involved where things need to be changed or fixed during the preparation process. So whether they're looking at some bylaws changes or approving some new policies, or maybe it's approving funding to do some exam development, or bringing in volunteers to do that work. Those kinds of things are where they can be most supportive and in kind of managing expectations of the larger group of shareholders. But primarily the work of doing this often goes to the staff team, assuming you have the luxury of having that.
Got it. All right, so let's see. We're going to open it up to the audience questions in just a moment. But before we do that, I had one last question for you. And it's around misconceptions. So what are some of the common misconceptions about accreditation?
So there are quite a few out there. One of the things that I come across most often is people just don't think that they can do this. Maybe that's a very new program, or maybe it's a very small program in terms of either their certificate pool or their staff size or their budget, however you want to measure small, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they're just like, this is too much. We can't do it. But we've worked with some really small programs, ones that are completely volunteer driven that have no staff, or just have a smaller budget or a smaller certificate pool. In those cases, you might need to spend more time. You might need to do more like on your own in terms of, implementing things, and maybe less, consultant time, things like that. But it's very doable. It's just managing the time and the expectations around it. There are tons of resources out there. If you take the time to find them and read through them or work through them, there are webinars, and ICE just put out a new book. There's tons of articles, things like that. So there's a vast number of resources. It's just getting, your staff time or your volunteer time to work through those and prepare for it. But it's very doable. I would say the other thing, and I don't know if it's so much as a misconception, but maybe a hurdle that we see people face a lot, is that they get super laser focused on getting accredited. It's really hard work, and they put the work in, and then they're like, okay, we did that, and we're really excited about it. Now let's take a little break because we're tired. And that little break turns into a few weeks, a few months, and then they haven't done the work to keep up with accreditation and stay in compliance, and then find themselves in trouble with whether it's annual report time or, the 5-year mark where they're reaccredited. So I'd say, that's just something I always try to remind people is, don't stop when you get accredited, but make sure you stay in compliance and continue to improve your program.
Yeah, so definitely not a one and done process.
Absolutely not.
Definitely, you've done the work. Now make sure you continue to get the benefit from the work. Excellent timing, Janice. We finished at 20 minutes past the hour. I'm now actually going to open it up to questions from our audience. So I'm just going to flip screens here. All of you should see at the bottom of your screen, you should see a little Q&A icon. If you go ahead and click on that icon, you can submit a question, and I will pass that through to Janice. And we have our first question here. And it kind of goes back to, I think we touched on this a little bit earlier, but we can elaborate. Our program is interested in accreditation. How long will it take?
Yeah, the actual how long it takes to get accredited once you apply, I would say, 4 to 6 months, something like that. I've seen it take longer, depending on, even that depends on how ready you are when you go in, right? So if you submit kind of this incredibly well organized, absolutely complete application where you've anticipated every question the accrediting body might ask, then you're going to go through that process pretty quickly. I'm sure they're still going to have questions for you, because when a bunch of people look at this material, there's going to be some questions, but you can kind of minimize those and move through just a few months. Everybody's timeline differs a little bit. But if that application isn't as well organized, it isn't as clear, then the accrediting body, the assessors, are going to have more questions for you. And that's going to slow the whole process, because they're going to come back with a set of questions. You're going to need to take time to answer them. they might not get all the information they need. That could cause further delays or maybe even a denial. If you're going through the 17024 process, that could be a lot of back and forth during or after your site visit. It could lengthen out those pieces. So, where you're motivated to keep it short, then I would say spend the time up front getting really well prepared, because that'll shorten that time. And then that, the time it takes to prepare is just going to, I think every consultant internally cringes when we say the word "it depends," but I don't know how else to say it, because it really, if you're going in with a program that's in really great shape, that's a shorter process versus if you've never done a job analysis before and you need to run through a whole exam development cycle, then that's a much longer process.
All right. Okay. We've got another couple of questions here. So this one is from Margaret. Thank you, Margaret. Her question is, what is the benefit of having accreditation from multiple accreditors?
That's a great question, and something that I've been thinking about a lot, because we have worked with some groups who do that or who are interested in seeking it. For them, what I've seen in terms of value is sometimes they are in a competitive situation where maybe their competitor has one accreditation, and so they want to be able to say, well, we have two.
Right.
And there's some value in that. The accrediting standards aren't the same either. So there are differences between NCCA and 17024, and also in nursing for ABS and C. And so, you might have, you might want to benefit from both aspects of that. So you might want to, you maybe think, hey, this set of standards is going to look, maybe more in depth at our psychometrics, where this one looks maybe more in depth at our, quality improvement process. And we see that we would internally benefit from having both of those. So, there could be some value there too as well.
Got it. We are getting lots of questions here, Janice. You're clearly engaging this substantial audience. So this question is from Chris. He says, we're developing, Chris or Christine, not sure. We're developing a certification program in conjunction with a university. We're also planning on pursuing a separate certification program accredited by a third party. The question is, should we pursue the certificate and the certification accreditations at the same time?
That's a good question. I mean, some of that might just be a business decision. You can certainly do both, and they're so separate that I think you could do them at the same time. I mean, they're not going to, getting a certificate program accredited, those standards are a lot about, curriculum development and things like that. And, so if you're developing them separately, then I think you could also pursue those accreditations at the same time. So for some audiences, one matters more than the other. So if you have cost factors or things like that, it might be something to look at too. Like, is there one that's perceived as being more important for the credibility of one program or the other, or something like that?
Got it. All right, these questions are coming in. We may be here for a while, Janice, but fantastic to get this level of engagement from the audience. So thank you, everybody. Keep the questions coming. This one is from Lorraine. She says, when a certificate course has been accredited, for example, nursing, and it's completed by a candidate, do they receive only a certificate of completion?
So that's also, I love these questions. They're great. So for certificate courses, or for accreditation of certificate programs, under the ICE 1100 standard, you cannot give like an acronym after your name. You can't have those letters after your name. So it would just be a certificate of completion. With the ANSI ASTM standard, there's some exceptions to that there are some possibilities for having that acronym. So that's one of those places where you want to think about like what standard you're applying for up front, and know, because most of these standards, whether it's certificate or certification, there's a lot of overlap. They're probably more alike than they are different, but there are some little differences. So that's one of the little differences between, or maybe it's not little, depending on how important it is to you, in the two sets of certificate standards. So if that's really important, to look at that standard and see if you could go that route, then that might be something to consider.
All right, thank you. And our next question is from Tara. And this question is, what are the biggest challenges that programs commonly face in meeting accreditation standards?
We need another hour to talk about the answer to that question. I would say, just really broadly and quickly, the first one would be documentation. That a lot of times the right things have been done, or the things you needed to do, but if you can't show that they were done, if you don't have sufficient documentation, then you're not going to meet the standard, or you can't show that you meet the standard. Other just broad areas we see, not having enough for certification programs, not having adequate separation between required education and the certification functions, especially if you're housed within an association that's involved with both governance issues, and a big one is just making sure you have all the boxes checked on all the different steps of exam development.
Got it. And Chris said, thank you very much. Your answer was fabulous. So
thank you.
This, we have an anonymous question, and this question is, can you provide insight on how to navigate the test development process so that the analysis are completed within the ANSI timeframe that is designated for the program?
It sounds like there's a lot of background I would need to know there to give you a full answer for that. But I would say that when you work with your psychometrician, and you absolutely need a psychometrician to get through the accreditation process for certification programs, it's really key to communicate with them up front about, this is our goal, whether it's getting ANSI accreditation or keeping ANSI accreditation. This is the time frame we have to work in. These are the expectations. These are the deadlines we need to meet, and just work that stuff right into your contract with them and the scope of work, so that everybody knows up front. And where you can find psychometricians, and it's not hard to do because there are plenty of them out there that have already worked with accredited programs, that's going to kind of give you a head start, because they know exactly what the reporting should look like and things like
that. We have a question here which you may choose to take offline, Janice. Just let me know. It's a question from Dr. May, and it's essentially asking for an idea of what the cost would be from the moment you receive a request for consulting through submission, final submission of the application. If you want me just to connect you with Dr. May offline, we can do that.
Yeah, and I mean, it's going to depend. We don't, Seacrest personally doesn't do exam development work, so the cost for the organization is going to a lot depend on where they're at in terms of preparation. So do they need to go out and hire a psychometrician, or have they already done that piece? That's going to influence cost. Do they have the data they need? Do they, so it's really just going to be very dependent on what all those needs are. Do you need to bring in a lawyer to make, significant changes to your bylaws, things like that? So all those costs can just really vary program to program, depending on, all the different kind of preparation steps they need to go through.
All right, now let's see. Lorraine says very helpful. Thank you. Dr. May thanks you. So let's see, we've got a couple more questions, but before I jump to those, so for folks that do want to follow up with you, Janice, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Sure. My email is long, but I will say what it is. It's jmoore, so JMOORE and it's Seacrest Company, all written out. And then our website is also seacrestcompany.com, so they can reach us through that as well.
Excellent. And we'll include that information when we share the recording with everybody. There are two more questions. And this first one, let me just, I think we've already talked about that one. So yeah, the last question would be, we'll make this the last one. Where can we learn more about accreditation requirements?
Oh, that's a good question. So there are several really good resources out there, and I will not remember all of them off the top of my head, but I would start with ICE, the Institute for Credentialing Excellence. They actually have a roadmap interactive tool on their website that will help walk you through. Do you have a certificate program? Do you have a certification program? These are your different options for each and where you can find more information. So that is a great basic place to start. More specifically, they also do a multi-day accreditation workshop that people can sign up for. ANSI does the same thing. They have a fantastic, standard by standard review the requirements workshop, so you can get that from either one. Keep an eye out for webinars, articles on those websites. Certification Networking Group, if you're in DC or Chicago, has lots of people who have been through this process that you can network with. One of the things that I love about the community that we all work in is that I have found people to be incredibly helpful in sharing information and their experiences. And so that can sometimes be invaluable, is just to find someone else that has gone through this and talk to them about their experience. There's obviously lots of consultants. There's the new IC handbook. So there's a lot out there that you can start digging into to find.
All right. Well, we have answered every question, Janice. So all that remains is for me to thank you so much for spending the time with us. I think we've just had an amazing crash course in all things accreditation, the whys, the hows, the who does it, issues, timelines, cost. I think we covered the gamut. So thank you very much for this. Everybody, you will get a copy of the recording. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
It was our pleasure, Janice. Thank you so much. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks.